Welcome to another edition of Coffee College. This is Omid G, the coffee professor. We're going to talk today about natural processed coffee and what that means and what it's all about, and really why you should care. And if you think about it, when you go and buy coffee, on the bag, if it's single origin, best case scenario, it's going to say the country name, and then it'll say a bunch of words you never heard of. And those words are going to be either the city, the region, the name of the farm, or the name of the family that grew it, something like that. But it's not going to be indicative of what type of process was used to process that coffee. And the reason you should care is different processes, first of all, have different flavor attributes and different creaminess attributes, or I should say consistency attributes. And then also they lend themselves to different types of coffee consumption, pour over versus filter versus espresso and so forth. So you need to care. Let me show you what natural processed coffee looks like. So take a look at this, and hopefully you can see that it's not just green like green coffee normally is traditionally. Do you see that there's rust colors and kind of orangish colors, maybe some reddish colors on there, and that there's residue stuck against the bag? That's what you get with natural processed coffee. And what happens is they take the cherries, and remember, coffee's a fruit, and they take the cherries, they pick them. Brazil's the only country that doesn't pick them by hand. They have these huge machines that go, and they can do that because they grow it on plateaus versus all other countries grow it on mountainsides. So if it's on a mountainside, there's no machine that's going to climb that and pick the cherries for you. Anyways, I digress. They take the cherries and then they take them straight out and put them in the sun on elevated beds. They typically don't just put them on the ground like what you might see with wash process coffee, which I talked about in another video. Wash process being where they mechanically depulp or pulp all of the rind off of the parchment layer of the coffee. So remember, there's the cherry, then there's the parchment layer, which gets really hard as the bean dries. And then there's the beans themselves that are inside. So they take those cherries, they lay them out in the sun. Places that have higher humidity kind of struggle with that process because it's more prone to mold. So no matter what, they have to constantly rake the cherries, and they'll keep raking them, and then they'll just shrivel up like any fruit would in the sun. And they'll keep raking it to prevent that mold. And then once it reaches the desired moisture level, then they take it to depulp and to mechanically get all that stuff off. And then they take off the parchment layer, and then it goes into the grain bags. Now, why do countries do natural process? One big reason is water, the lack of water, because wash process, as the name implies, uses a tremendous amount of water. So natural process really hardly requires any kind of water at all. So that's a big reason to do it. And then another reason is flavor outcomes and what you're trying to achieve with the bean. But most countries that do it are doing it for a farming or mechanical reason or a functional reason. There's really 3 countries primarily that do natural processed coffee. One is Brazil, and you're talking about the biggest coffee producer on earth, and all they do is natural process. The second is Ethiopia. They do both natural process and wash process. And you know my opinion, if you watch my videos, they make the best coffee on earth. And their natural process and wash process are both equally notable. And then there's Yemen, which exclusively does natural process. And I'm pretty sure that's a function of not having water, because where they do it is up on these huge dry mountains. They literally, it seems like they carve terraces into the mountainside in almost what looks like stone. But there has to be dirt there because they're planting. Anyway, it's a water issue for them. Brazil, it's a water conservation issue. And then for Ethiopia, I think it's more about the art of the coffee. They do it both ways. What happens as a consequence of making it natural process? Well, as the cherry is drying on the bean, it actually, those flavors penetrate. And it's not just flavors that penetrate the parchment layer. Remember that parchment layer is that shell that's around the bean. And it's thin, but it's quite hard. Like if I've seen it when they mechanically depulp it, it's a process to get it off. It's nothing like a peanut shell. It's much harder. And I've tried to do it by hand. You pretty much can't do it. You need a hammer. But it's not always hard. It starts out as soft and permeable. And so the cherry is penetrating that as it dries. You get some flavors going through, and then also you get some sort of, I'm trying to look for the right word. You get some kind of residue. It's not the best word, but that penetrates the parchment layer as well, and that just rests on the bean itself. And as a consequence, when you roast natural processed coffee, it's a bloody mess. I mean, there's what's called chaff. It looks like brown confetti all over the place. It's everywhere, tons of it. It's a huge byproduct of roasting natural processed coffee, huge mess. Luckily, we have systems for that, but it's a huge mess. Now, taste-wise, what happens? Now, this is the funny part, or let's say the interesting part. It depends on the bean. It depends on the altitude it was grown at. It depends on the soil and whether the soil was prone to enable the development of acidic flavors and vibrant flavors within the bean. So it seems to me that whatever the natural flavors of the bean are, natural process then enhances those flavors, enriches those flavors, and makes them creamier. It's probably the best way I can put it. So with the example of Brazilian beans, it's a low elevation bean. It's grown in full sun. It's not grown on volcanic soil. So it's not an acidic bean at all. There's no vibrancy to Brazilian beans. They're very low acid. And making it natural process is not suddenly going to make it fruity. It'll make it creamy, but not fruity. So these beans that I showed you here, it's a rare Guatemalan natural process, super high elevation. It has a fairly syrupy type flavor of strawberry and chocolate notes, but there's a distinct strawberry flavor in there. You're never going to get that out of Brazilian beans. It might say it on the package that there's hints of this fruit or that fruit. You're not going to taste, no matter what you do, you're not going to taste those flavors, I promise. Whereas with an Ethiopian coffee, it's going to overwhelm you like a tsunami. It's going to be a fruit bomb. When they say it's got those flavors, it's a fruit bomb. And there's no mistaking it unless you screw it up the way you consume it. So Brazilian coffees, they're going to be very chocolatey, nutty. It's going to taste like roasted nuts and roasted chocolate. And typically Brazilian coffee does not taste good, light roast. So you're only going to see it on the darker end of medium or dark. And that's where Brazilian coffee tends to shine. It's really, I'll just put this on the record, and I'm married to a Brazilian. Brazilian coffee is boring every way you drink it, with the exception of an espresso, where it becomes majestic. And it becomes a vehicle by which to carry flavors from other beans. So you would always want to have it as a part of a blend. You'd never want to have a single origin Brazilian coffee. It's fine to have a single origin Brazilian wife, but not single origin Brazilian coffee in espresso or something else. You want to have it blended, and that's where it gets really delicious. But it's nutty. It's like toasted nuts, roasted nuts, toasted chocolate. Now, let's go to Ethiopian. Now you get something totally different. Now, by the way, I showed you Guatemalan, but anything outside of those three countries is rare to find natural process. And that's what I like to do, is find rare beans, but don't expect to find those very often. So we go to Ethiopia, and I indicated again, it's a fruit bomb. So it depends on the region. I have another video that talks about wash process and talks about geisha, and kind of I talk about Ethiopia a little bit in there. Ethiopian beans, their taste varies depending on what region you get it from. So I'm not going to repeat what I said in the other video, but I'll just say that. So whether it's Yirgacheffe or the Guji region or Harar or Sidamo or Sidama, those are the ones that are coming to my mind right now, or the Gesha region. It's the ones that you go to, that's going to kind of dictate the flavors you're going to get. So with natural processed Ethiopian coffee, you could get a very creamy apricot flavor, very creamy peach flavor. There's parts of the country where you might get a very creamy blueberry flavor, like from Harar. If it's a longberry bean, they call it, from Harar, you could get a very creamy blueberry flavor. You might get floral flavors, but those are harder to find in the natural process. Now, what I forgot to mention about natural process is the characteristic that it imbues onto the bean when you're drinking it. So you can drink natural processed beans any way you like. You can have a filter, pour over, espresso. With the exception, again, of Brazilian, I would only do Brazilian in espresso, and I would only do it as a part of a blend. Anything else is just bad coffee. But Ethiopian, Yemen, do it any way you like, and it's going to be good. But where natural process really is off the hook good is when you're doing espresso, because that natural process creates crema. And I'm going to create another video on the topic of crema. But the short version is that crema captures the flavors that you introduce into that coffee or coffee blend. So in the case of this coffee being sort of having the strawberry flavors, that crema is going to carry that strawberry flavor. Without crema, then that flavor dissipates very, very fast. You only really produce crema making espresso. That's really the only way you're going to do it. So with Ethiopian coffee, you're going to get tremendous crema. With Brazilian, tremendous crema. With Yemeni coffee, tremendous crema. The Ethiopian natural process, I think I talked enough about that. You're going to get those fruit bombs. It's incredible. And the really cool thing about Ethiopian is you can go the natural process. I wouldn't say the same about wash process. Ethiopian is you could go light roast, medium roast, or even nudging closer to dark roast. And the crazy thing is you don't lose the fruit flavor. So you can get a close to dark roast Ethiopian natural process, and it'll still taste like fruit, but it'll be a dried fruit, and it'll be definitely not burnt flavor. I'm not much more rich, like a condensed dry fruit flavor, more dehydrated than you get with light roast. It's just really good no matter how you do it. Yemen is the same way, except with Yemeni coffee now, you have more tastes of dates and malts and grains. And some people, well, we have an interruption here. I'm recording, Sophia. And then some people even explain it as sort of wild fruits sort of flavors. I don't always get that with Yemeni coffees, but definitely the molasses, the dates, the grains, it's an incredible coffee. And again, you can take it light roast, medium roast, or dark roast. It's good no matter how you do it. So those are the three primary coffees. You can see my guest in the background here. And the natural process is really going to give you those characteristics that you ought to look for in espresso. Now, or if you want to drink Yemeni, which is extremely hard to find, or the Ethiopian, then any way you like it. It's great in pour over, it's great in filter, it's great in, cold brew, it's great, all those methods. Now, they're also great in blends. They're all really great in blends. In fact, the first blend that was ever created in coffee history was as a consequence of the Dutch, and they mixed Yemeni coffee with the Indonesian coffees, and that was sort of a mocha Java blend. That's exactly what they called it. Now, it's not mocha, M-O-C-H-A, it's mocha, M-O-K-K-A, because that's the variety most commonly seen in Yemen. Yemen got coffee after Ethiopia. It was born in Ethiopia, then it was taken to Yemen, then to India, then it went to other countries. So that's the deal with natural processed coffee. It's a delicious product. Know what you're getting, and look for it when you're drinking espresso or trying to buy espresso. And then when you go to a coffee shop and you're ordering a latte, I urge you to ask them, what kind of coffee are you using? And chances are 99% of the time they don't know, or they know, they'll say it's that one over there. They'll point you to a bag. Then you go and look at that bag. They themselves don't know what it is, what the characteristics are. Go and look at that bag, and then you'll find out what's going on. Here's my guest in the background. And very oftentimes I'll find out they're doing something like doing a washed Nicaraguan or a washed Honduran coffee or something like that. And then I know they're making an economic decision. This was a business decision to use a suboptimal coffee for espresso. You're not really supposed to use wash processed coffees for espresso. And then those are regions that don't typically have good coffees either. So know what's in your Joe, know what's in your coffee. And especially if you're going to go someplace and order an espresso drink, ask them what's in it, and then go and read the bag. Is it natural process, or is it a blend that includes natural process? Now, the exceptions are, I don't want to go too deep into this, but the exceptions are, there's two other types of coffee that produce crema in espresso, and I'll talk about this more in other videos. One is Indonesian coffee, which is almost always wet hulled, and the other is Monsoon Malabar from India, which you'll never find in any coffee shop. It's so rare. So there you go. That's the deep dive scoop on natural processed coffee. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. This is Coffee College, and I'm Omid G, the coffee professor, and we will see you next time.